So let's start with a tissue that's maybe a little underappreciated, but absolutely critical. Let's begin with cartilage.
Cartilage, it's this resilient, really fundamental connective tissue. Its defining feature is this massive extracellular matrix with relatively few cells.
And it's usually covered by a fibrous sheath,
That's
the perichondrium, right?
That's right, the perichondrium. But there's a huge exception, and it's probably the most important one for movement.
Articular cartilage.
Articular cartilage, yeah. The stuff that covers the surfaces of our joints. It has no perichondrium, which has major functional consequences we'll get into.
So we know there are three main types: hyaline, fibrocartilage, and elastic.
Yeah.
And the sources say they're functionally different because of their fiber content.
They are. But what's interesting is they all share the same basic cell types and the same core features in their matrix.
Okay, so let's zero in on that then. The secret to its success, as our source puts it, is the extracellular matrix, the ECM.
The ECM is everything in cartilage. It's what's actually carrying the load. And it is a masterpiece of material science. It's built from three key things.
Okay.
You've got collagen fibers, predominantly type 2 collagen. You have massive molecules called proteoglycans. And then you have a truly staggering amount of water.
How much water are we talking about?
70 to 85% of its weight is water.
Wow, okay. That's not just incidental. That high water content has to be a structural feature.
It's the structural feature. And it's there entirely because of the proteoglycans.
Which brings us to this great analogy in the text, the proteoglycan supersponge. I love that. Can you break down how that actually works on a molecular level to resist compression?
Sure. So the main player here is a giant proteoglycan called aggrecan. Think of it like a bottle brush. You have a central protein core, and sticking out from it are hundreds of these side chains.
And those are the gags.
Those are the gags, the glycosaminoglycans.
Huh.
And here's the critical bit. These gags are packed with fixed negative charges.
Okay, so you have hundreds of these negatively charged chains all crammed together in the matrix, and like charges repel.
They repel fiercely. So these gag chains are constantly trying to push away from each other, trying to expand and take up as much space as possible.
But they can't, they're trapped.
They're trapped within this matrix. But what they can do is attract something else. Water molecules are highly polar, and they are powerfully drawn to these negative charges. So the gags just suck water into the matrix and hold it there.
And that creates this immense internal pressure.
An immense internal swelling pressure. We call it turgor pressure. The cartilage is basically pressurized from the inside out all the time.
So it's like a water balloon that's trapped inside a very strong, very fine net. When I stand up or jump and that compressive force hits my knee joint.
You're trying to squeeze that water out. And you have to overcome that incredible turgor pressure to do it. That is the fundamental reason cartilage can bear so much load and resist compression so effectively.
That's fascinating. So the pressure itself is the source of the strength. But what about that net? What provides the containment?
That's the other key component, the collagen network. The collagen fibers, which are mostly type 2 in hyaline cartilage, provide the tensile strength. They're like the steel cables in the system.
So they contain the swelling pressure?
Exactly. They prevent the matrix from just bursting apart under tension when it gets compressed. The proteoglycans push out, the collagen pulls in. It's a perfect balance.
And the sources make a point of saying it's type 2 collagen. That's different from what we see in, say, tendons or skin.
Very different. Type of collagen is the big, tough fiber for resisting cure tension. Type 2 forms a much finer, more intricate meshwork, which is perfectly suited for containing that pressurized gel.
Incredible. Okay, let's talk about the cells, the architects of this system. We have chondroblasts and chondrocytes.
Right. The chondroblasts are the builders. They're the younger, more active cells that are derived from progenitor cells. Their entire job is to produce all the components of that ECM, the collagen, the aggrecan, everything.
And you find them near the perichondrium, right, where they have access to a blood supply.
Exactly. They're often flattened. They're actively dividing. They're just churning out matrix.
And then over time, they essentially build themselves into a corner.
That's a great way to put it. As they mature, they become completely encased by the very matrix they've just secreted. And at that point, they transform
Into chondrocytes.
into chondrocytes, the mature resident cells.
Yeah.
And their whole role changes. They're now living in these little spaces called lacunae.
And they switch from building to just maintaining.
Right. Their metabolic activity drops way down, especially as we age.
Sure.
Their job is now just long-term maintenance of the matrix that immediately surrounds them.
I saw a note in here about isogenous groups. What are those?
That's a classic feature you see in cartilage under the microscope. Because the chondrocytes are trapped in their lacunae, when they divide, the daughter cells are stuck together.
So you get these little clusters.
You get clusters of 2, 4, sometimes even 8 cells, all from the same parent. Those are isogynous groups. And you'll often see them surrounded by a darker staining ring of matrix.
The territorial matrix.
Yeah, the territorial matrix. It's rich in newly synthesized GAGs, so it highlights that local maintenance work the cells are doing. It's a little footprint of their activity.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's focus on the most common type then. Hyaline cartilage. The source calls it the glassy because of its smooth, opalescent appearance.
It's everywhere. It forms the precursor skeleton in the fetus. It's in our ribs, our respiratory tract. But for this discussion, its most important role is as articular cartilage, the stuff lining our joints.
And this is where it gets really specialized. Articular cartilage isn't just a uniform slab, it's layered. It has this zonation.
It has to be zoned. It's performing multiple functions at once. It has to provide a smooth sliding surface at the top and a rock-solid anchor to the bone at the bottom. Can't do that with one uniform material.
So let's walk through the layers from the joint surface down. It starts with the superficial or tangential zone.
Right, so right at the surface you have small, flattened chondrocytes. But the key feature here is the collagen fibers. They're all running perfectly parallel to the joint surface.
Tangent.
Exactly. And that parallel alignment is absolutely critical for resisting the shear forces you get when the joint surfaces slide past each other. It's what makes it so incredibly smooth and low friction.
Okay, so that's the sliding layer. Then we go deeper into the middle or intermediate zone.
Here, things get a bit more random. The chondrocytes are rounder, and the collagen fibers are oriented in a more haphazard mesh-like fashion.
What's the function of that?
It's a transitional shock absorber. It takes the initial compressive force and helps distribute it laterally before it gets transmitted deeper into the tissue.
And then below that, the structure changes dramatically again in the deep or radial zone.
It's a total switch. The chondrocytes do something amazing here. Yeah. They line themselves up in neat vertical columns like stacks of coins.
And the collagen fibers follow suit.
They do. The collagen in the deep zone runs perpendicularly to the joint surface, right alongside those cell columns.
So it's oriented to directly resist the main compressive loads coming straight down through the joint.
It's the perfect engineering solution. It's like having all your support pillars lined up to take the weight of the roof. This is the primary load-bearing region.
And finally, we hit the base layer, the calcified zone.
Correct. And it's separated from the deep zone by a microscopic line you can actually see called the tide mark.
So what is the tide mark?
It's the functional boundary. Above the tide mark, you have the living, pliable, hydrated cartilage. Below it, in the calcified zone, the cartilage matrix starts to mineralize. It becomes hard and brittle.
And that's how it anchors itself to the bone underneath.
That's the anchor. It provides a gradual transition in stiffness from the flexible cartilage to the rigid subchondral bone, which prevents the two very different materials from shearing apart at the interface.
This whole structure is incredible. But it brings us to what has to be its biggest weakness, its Achilles heel, nutrition.
It's a huge problem because cartilage is fundamentally avascular. There are no blood vessels running through that dense matrix.
So how do those chondrocytes, especially the ones deep in the radial zone, stay alive?
They have to rely entirely on passive diffusion. Nutrients, like oxygen and glucose, have to slowly seep in from one of two places.
Okay.
From the synovial fluid that bathes the joint surface, which gets its supply from the synovial membrane. And for the deepest layers, nutrients have to diffuse up from the blood vessels in the subchondral bone marrow.
That sounds incredibly inefficient.
It is. The source gives a really important piece of data here. The diffusion coefficient for a large molecule, like a proteoglycan, is 3 times lower in cartilage than it would be in plain water.
So that dense matrix that's so great for bearing load is terrible for transport.
It's a massive barrier, and this single fact explains so many clinical problems with cartilage.
It explains why movement is so important, right? The pumping action of loading and unloading the joint physically squeezes fluid in and out.
Absolutely. Without that mechanical pumping, the cells would starve.
And it also explains why it's so bad at repairing itself.
Terribly bad. If the cells have such a low metabolic rate just to stay alive, they have absolutely no capacity to mount a robust repair response after an injury. They just can't get the building blocks they need fast enough.
Okay, so that's the masterpiece and the fatal flaw of hyaline cartilage. Let's compare that to the other two types. We can start with fibrocartilage, the dense, tough one.
Fibrocartilage is a different beast entirely. Hyaline cartilage with its type 2 collagen is all about resisting compression through that trigger pressure.
Right.
Fibrocartilage is built to resist a combination of compression and tension, pulling forces.
And to do that, it brings back a different type of collagen.
It brings back the big gun, type I collagen. The ECM of fibrocartilage is packed with these thick, distinct bundles of type I collagen fibers.
Which is the same type we find in tendons and ligaments, the real tensile stuff.
Exactly. And importantly, these collagen bundles aren't random. They're aligned perfectly parallel to the main lines of tensile stress that the tissue experiences.
So it's structurally optimized for the forces it will see. And where do we find it?
You find it in the toughest places in the body. The annulus fibrosus of the intervertebral discs, which has to handle massive tension and compression, the menisci in the knee, the pubic symphysis.
Places that get pulled and squashed simultaneously.
Right. And like articular cartilage, it's also avascular and lacks a typical perichondrium. Its strength comes purely from that incredibly dense, organized, type I collagen matrix.
Okay. And the last one is elastic cartilage, the flexible one.
Elastic cartilage is, in some ways, a hybrid. It has the same basic foundation as hyaline cartilage, type 2 collagen, chondrocytes in lacunae.
But with an added ingredient?
A very important added ingredient, a dense network of elastic fibers made of the protein elastin.
And the function is right there in the name, elasticity.
Tremendous elastic recoil. You can deform this tissue significantly, bend it, stretch it, pull it, and it just snaps right back to its original shape.
So we find it in the external ear, the auricle.
The ear, the epiglottis, which has to flip up and down constantly without breaking, and some of the small cartilages in the larynx.
And the source material mentions another advantage. It says it resists fraying damage better than hyaline. Why is that?
Because it can accommodate that large strain without failing. Hyaline cartilage is very stiff and can be brittle. If you bend it too far, it cracks. Elastic cartilage can deform much more before it reaches its failure point, so it's much more durable under repeated bending and flexing.
It's amazing how each type is just perfectly tuned for its specific mechanical job.
It's a beautiful example of structure dictating function.
All right, let's make a big transition. We're moving from the flexible, pressurized world of cartilage to the rigid scaffolding of the body.
Bone.
The hard stuff. The hard stuff. And we asked this question at the start. How can bone be so strong, so rigid, and yet also be lightweight and adaptable? And the answer really is all about its material science and its architecture.
It really is. Bone is the definitive rigid connective tissue, and functionally it's doing a few key jobs. It provides the levers for locomotion.
Right, something for muscles to pull on.
It offers rigid support for the whole body. It protects our vital organs. And this one is easy to forget, but it's the body's massive bank for minerals.
Calcium and phosphate.
The main reservoir. The body is constantly making deposits and withdrawals from that bank to keep blood levels stable.
So let's quickly run through the macroanatomy of a typical long bone, like the femur. You have the main shaft,
The diaphysis,
the expanded end,
the epiphyses,
and the flared region in between where growth happens.
the metaphysis. Simple enough.
And then structurally, we have the dense outer shell, which is the compact or cortical bone.
And inside, you have the honeycomb-like structure, the trabecular or cancellous bone.
And it's all wrapped up. The outside is covered by the periosteum, and all the internal surfaces are lined by the endosteum.
Right. And I think it's worth pausing on the surface of the bone for a second. The sources talk about features like fossae, which are depressions, or trochanters, which are large bumps. These aren't just random.
No, they are direct readouts of the forces the bone has experienced.
Exactly. A big elevation like the greater trochanter on the femur exists precisely because massive tendons attach there and exert huge pulling forces. The bone literally reshapes itself to better handle that specific load. They're biomechanical footprints.
That's a great way to put it. Okay, now for the really key insight, the material science. Bone is a composite material.
This is the central concept. It's not one thing. It's a combination of materials with very different properties. And that combination is what makes it so uniquely resilient.
So by dry weight, it's about 30% organic and 60–70% inorganic. Let's start with the organic part.
The organic matrix is designed for tensile strength and flexibility, and it is absolutely dominated by one protein.
Type I collagen.
90% of the organic part is type I collagen. This is the rebar in our biological concrete. It's what stops the bone from being brittle.
And the other 10%, I see things like proteoglycans, Js, and these non-collagenous proteins listed.
And those non-collagenous proteins, things like osteocalcin, osteonectin, and osteopontin, They are critically important. They aren't just filler. They are the molecular signals that regulate the whole mineralization process. They tell the mineral exactly where to go and when to deposit.
Okay, so they're the foremen on the construction site directing the delivery of the concrete.
A perfect analogy.
So then we have the inorganic matrix. This is what provides the hardness and the compressive strength.
Correct. This is the concrete itself. It's crystalline mineral salt, primarily in the form of calcium hydroxyapatite.
Kapta-10, PO46, OH2.
That's the one. And these are tiny ceramic-like crystals. And the way they're deposited is incredibly precise. They're not just sprinkled in randomly.
Where do they go?
They are packed into the gaps and holes between the collagen fibrils, and they are aligned perfectly with the long axes of those fibrils.
And that's where the magic of the composite comes in. The reinforced concrete analogy really holds up.
It's perfect. The collagen rebar resists tension and stops the bone from shattering under a sudden impact. The hydroxyapatite concrete provides the hardness and resists compression.
So if you take out the mineral, like in a disease like rickets, the bone becomes soft and bends.
It's all rebar, no concrete.
And if you could magically remove the collagen, the bone would be hard, but incredibly brittle, like a piece of chalk.
All concrete, no rebar. It would shatter. The combination allows bone to handle complex loads like bending, which puts one side in tension and the other in compression. It's brilliant.
It is. Okay, so now we know what bone is made of. Let's talk about who makes it. We have this dynamic trio of bone cells. Let's start with the builders, the osteoblasts.
Osteoblasts. They come from those mesenchymal stem cells we mentioned earlier. You find them lining the surfaces of bone, and their job is really twofold.
Okay.
First, they synthesize the organic matrix. They secrete all that type I collagen and the regulatory proteins. That unmineralized matrix is called osteoid.
So they lay down the rebar first.
Exactly. And then, second, they regulate the mineralization process that follows. They control the delivery of the concrete.
How do they do that?
They secrete enzymes like alkaline phosphatase, which increases the local concentration of phosphate ions, helping to kickstart crystal deposition. And they secrete proteins like osteocalcin, which binds to calcium. They're actively orchestrating the chemical environment.
But the sources say their most critical regulatory role is actually controlling the other cells, specifically the demolition crew.
Oh, absolutely. This is maybe their most important job. They control the osteoclasts through this elegant feedback loop called the rank-rankle OPG system.
Okay, this is a big one. Let's unpack this system carefully, because it's central to everything from bone growth to osteoporosis. There are three components.
Three components. It's a switch. You have AN and CALO.
Which stands for receptor activator of nuclear factor kappa B ligand.
You don't need to memorize that. Just think of RANKLL as the go signal. It's a protein that the osteoblast expresses on its surface.
Okay, so the builder cell holds up a go sign. Who is it signaling?
It's signaling the precursor to the osteoclast, the demolition cell. That precursor has a receptor on its surface called rank.
So when RANKL on the builder binds to rank on the demolition precursor.
It's like turning a key in the ignition. That signal tells the precursor cell to differentiate, to mature, and to activate into a full-blown bone-resorbing osteoclast. It's the green light for demolition.
Okay, so RANKL is the accelerator, but any good system needs a brake. You can't have runaway bone loss.
And that's the third piece of the puzzle, osteoprotogerin, or OPG.
Which means bone protector.
Exactly. OPG is also secreted by the osteoblasts, the builder cells, and it's essentially a decoy receptor. It's a free-floating molecule that looks just like the rank receptor.
So it binds to RANKL before RANKL can get to the osteoclast precursor.
It intercepts the signal, it soaks it up, it acts as the brake on bone resorption.
So the whole system is balanced by the ratio of RANKL to OPG.
Precisely. If the osteoblasts produce a lot of RANKL and not much OPG, you get a lot of bone resorption. If they produce a lot of OPG, resorption is blocked and bone formation is favored. It's this beautiful, locally controlled tuning knob for bone remodeling.
Amazing. Okay, moving on from the builders, what happens to them? Some of them become the residents, the osteocytes.
Right. If the osteoblasts are the construction crew, the osteocytes are the live-in building inspectors and maintenance managers.
So these are osteoblasts that got trapped in the matrix they were building.
Yep. They end up in their own little lacunae, just like chondrocytes. But there's a huge difference. Osteocytes are not isolated.
They form this massive, interconnected network.
An absolutely vast network. They have these incredibly long, thin cytoplasmic processes that extend out from the cell body and travel through tiny tunnels in the bone called canaliculi.
And they connect to their neighbors.
They connect to their neighbors, and they connect to the cells lining the bone surfaces. It's like a cellular internet running through the solid bone matrix.
And the function of this network is mechanosensing. They feel the strain on the bone.
That's their primary job. When you walk or run, the bone flexes ever so slightly. That microscopic deformation causes fluid to flow through the canaliculi.
And the osteocytes can sense that fluid flow.
They sense the shear stress from the flow, and they interpret that as a signal about the mechanical load. If they sense high strain or if they sense microdamage, they use their network to send signals out to the osteoblasts and osteoclasts on the surface.
Directing them to add more bone where it's needed or repair the damage.
Exactly. They are the master regulators of local bone remodeling. And they are incredibly long-lived cells. Some of your osteocytes can be with you for 25 years or more.
Truly remarkable. Okay, finally, the third cell type, the demolishers, the osteoclasts.
The demolition crew. And these cells are the odd ones out. They're completely different structurally and developmentally.
They're not from the mesenchymal lineage like the others.
No, they're derived from hematopoietic stem cells. They're in the same family as monocytes and macrophages. They're immune system cells that have been repurposed for bone resorption.
And they're huge, big, multinucleated cells.
Very large. You find them sitting in these little pits on the bone surface that they've carved out for themselves. Those are called Hauschup's lacunae.
So how do they actually do it? How do they dissolve this incredibly tough composite material?
It's a very clever two-pronged attack. First, they have to create a sealed-off microenvironment. They attach tightly to the bone surface and form what's called a ruffled border.
So they seal off a little compartment?
A resorption bay. And into that sealed space, they pump powerful acids, mainly carbonic acid.
To dissolve the mineral, the hydroxyapatite.
That takes care of the concrete. Then for the rebar, they secrete powerful hydrolytic enzymes. The most important one is called cathepsin K.
And cathepsin K is specifically adapted to digest type I collagen.
It's a collagen-eating enzyme. So you have this 1-2 punch. Acid dissolves the mineral, enzymes digest the organic matrix, and the osteoclast just chews its way through the bone.
And this whole process is tightly regulated not just by that local Rankel-PG ratio, but by systemic hormones as well.
Absolutely. Hormones like parathyroid hormone can ramp up osteoclast activity when the body needs to withdraw calcium from the bone bank to maintain blood calcium levels. It's a system that's controlled at multiple levels.
Incredible. So that's the cellular machinery. Let's look at the structures they build. When we look at bone on a microscopic level, the organization of the collagen fibers tells us a lot.
It tells us everything about its mechanical properties. We start with the two basic types. First, you have woven bone.
This is the weaker stuff.
It's the quick and dirty bone. The collagen fibers are arranged in a random, haphazard, crisscross pattern. It's mechanically weak, but it can be laid down very, very quickly.
So you see it when speed is more important than strength.
Exactly. During fetal development, during the initial stages of fracture repair, or unfortunately in some pathological states like bone tumors.
And then, once things settle down, it gets remodeled into the mature, permanent, strong version.
Lamellar bone.
Lamellar bone. And lamellae means layers.
It's all about the layers. In lamellar bone, the collagen fibers are meticulously organized into these parallel sheets, or lamellae.
And the key to its strength is that the orientation of the fibers changes from one layer to the next.
That's the secret. It's like plywood. In one layer, the fibers might run in one direction. In the next layer, they're offset by 90 degrees. This alternating pattern gives it incredible strength against torsional or twisting forces.
Okay, so now we take that strong lamellar bone and we apply it to the big macroscopic structures. Let's start with cortical bone, the dense outer shell.
Cortical bone makes up about 80% of the skeleton's mass. It's designed for maximum strength and rigidity. And its basic structural unit is the osteon.
Also called the Haversian system.
Right. And an osteon is essentially a cylinder of concentric lamellae. You have anywhere from 4 to 20 of these layers of bone wrapped around a central canal.
The Haversian canal. And that's the lifeline.
That's the neurovascular bundle. It contains the capillary, nerve fibers, and lymphatic vessels that are needed to keep the osteocytes within that osteon alive.
So all the osteocytes trapped in their lacunae between the lamellae, they're all sending their little canaliculi, their processes, towards that central canal to get nutrients.
Exactly. And the whole system is networked together. You have these other canals called perforating or Volkmann's canals that run perpendicularly.
And they connect the Haversian canals to each other.
They connect them to each other, and they connect the whole internal system back to the rich blood supply on the outside, in the periosteum, and on the inside in the endosteum. It's a beautifully integrated plumbing system.
And this dense tubular organization is what gives cortical bone its incredible strength, especially against bending forces.
Right. In contrast, you have trabecular bone, the cancellous or spongy bone you find inside the marrow cavities.
It looks random, like a sponge, but it's not.
Not at all. It's composed of these delicate bars and plates called trabeculae. And if you look closely, you'll see that the trabeculae are aligned precisely along the lines of principal stress.
This is Wolff's Law in action.
This is the physical manifestation of Wolff's Law. The bone has organized its internal structure to provide the maximum amount of strength for the minimum amount of weight. It's an engineering marvel of optimization.
And the spaces in between the trabeculae are filled with marrow.
Either red marrow, which is hematopoietic and produces our blood cells, or yellow marrow, which is fatty tissue.
And we just have to quickly define the coverings again. The periosteum on the outside.
It's a tough two-layered sheath. It has an outer fibrous layer for protection and for anchoring tendons and ligaments, and it has an intercellular layer that's packed with osteoprogenitor cells.
So it's essential for growth and repair.
Absolutely vital. And it's highly vascularized and has a rich nerve supply, which is why breaking a bone is so incredibly painful. The pain comes from the periosteum.
And on the inside, lining all the internal cavities, the trabeculae and all those canals, is the thin endosteum.
Right. And it also contains osteoprogenitor cells. Yeah. It's the cellular source for all the internal remodeling and maintenance that goes on constantly.
Okay, that's a fantastic overview of the architecture. Now, how does this complex structure actually get built in the first place? Bone formation happens through two very different pathways.
It does. And the pathway used depends on the type of bone being formed. The first and simpler method is intramembranous ossification.
The direct method.
The direct method. This is how the flat bones of the skull and the mandible are formed. It happens directly within a fibrous sheet of embryonic tissue, the mesenchyme.
So the mesenchymal cells just turn into osteoblasts.
They differentiate directly into osteoblasts, which then immediately starts secreting osteoid, which then mineralizes. There's no middleman. It's a very direct process.
But for long bones, it's a much more complex, indirect process.
Much more complex. This is endochondral ossification. And the key is that it's a replacement process. You don't start with bone, you start with a template.
A miniature hyaline cartilage model of the future bone.
Exactly. Chondroblasts form this perfect little cartilage model first. Then a whole cascade of events begins. Blood vessels invade, bringing in signals and cells.
And the primary center of ossification appears right in the middle of the diaphysis?
Right in the shaft. The cartilage there starts to die off and is replaced by woven bone, which is later remodeled into lamellar bone. And then, a bit later, secondary centers of ossification appear in the epiphyses at the ends of the bone.
But the critical part for how we get taller, for longitudinal growth, is the bit of cartilage that's left between the diaphysis and the epiphysis.
The growth plate, or the physis. This little plate of hyaline cartilage is the engine of longitudinal growth.
And it's not just a simple plate. It's a highly organized zone structure that works like a little factory.
It's an incredible, chronologically structured process. You can see the whole sequence of events laid out in these distinct zones. If we start from the epiphyseal side, the first zone is the resting zone.
And that just anchors the growth plate to the epiphysis.
Right, it's the anchor point. But then as you move toward the diaphysis, you hit the proliferation zone.
And as the name implies, this is where the cells are dividing rapidly.
Proliferating like crazy.
Yeah.
The chondrocytes divide, and they arrange themselves into these distinct vertical columns. And this zone is what's literally making the bone longer. It's pushing the epiphysis away from the diaphysis.
So that's where the new length is generated. What's the next zone?
The hypertrophy zone. Here, the cells stop dividing and they just get huge. They swell up to 5 or 10 times their original size.
Why do they do that?
As they enlarge, they secrete enzymes that break down the cartilage matrix around them, and then they undergo apoptosis. They die. This prepares the area for what's coming next.
Which is the calcification zone.
Right. The remnants of that matrix that they just broke down become mineralized. They calcify, forming a rigid, porous scaffold.
And that scaffold is the template for the final step, the ossification zone.
This is where the bone-building machinery moves in. Blood vessels and osteoprogenitor cells from the diaphysis invade that calcified scaffold. Osteoblasts line up on it and start depositing new bone matrix right on top of the calcified cartilage remnants.
So it's a full conversion from cartilage to
A
bone.
full conversion.
Yeah.
And this entire process continues until puberty, when hormonal signals tell the growth plate to shut down.
The process of epiphyseal fusion, or synostosis, the cartilage is completely replaced by bone and longitudinal growth stops.
That's it. You've reached your final adult height.
So that takes care of length. But bones also have to get wider as we grow to support more weight. That's appositional growth.
Right. And this is a beautifully coordinated process. To make the bone wider, you have osteoblasts in the periosteum on the outside, laying down new layers of bone.
So it's adding to the outer surface.
But at the same time, you have osteoclasts in the endosteum on the inside, resorbing bone from the inner surface.
Why? Why remove bone from the inside?
To enlarge the marrow cavity and to keep the bone from becoming too heavy and dense, this dual action moves the entire shaft outward while maintaining the right cortical thickness. It preserves the strength of the hollow cylinder design.
It's all so tightly controlled. And that brings us to the systemic factors. The whole process is regulated by a bath of hormones.
Absolutely paramount. Things like growth hormone and thyroid hormones are the master regulators, directly stimulating the activity of both chondrocytes in the growth plate and osteoblasts.
And then, of course, the sex hormones play a huge role during puberty.
A critical role.
Yeah.
Testosterone and estrogen initially cause a growth spurt by stimulating matrix synthesis, but they are also the primary signal for epiphyseal fusion. They're what eventually tells the growth plate to close down.
So they both accelerate growth and then terminate it.
Exactly. And then, of course, we have the hormones that regulate mineral balance. Vitamin D and parathyroid hormone, or PTH.
Right. PTH is the body's calcium sensor.
When blood calcium gets too low, PTH is released. And one of its main targets is the osteoblast. It tells the osteoblast to express more NKL.
Activating the osteoclast to withdraw some calcium from the bone bank.
Correct. And vitamin D, which is actually a hormone called calcitriol, is essential because it allows us to absorb calcium from our diet in the first place. Without vitamin D, you can eat all the calcium you want, but you can't use it to build bone.
And the sources remind us not to forget the basics, like vitamin C.
You can't overlook it. This is maybe the most incredible feature of bone. It's constantly renewing itself. The average adult renews about 10% of their skeleton every single year.
That's a huge amount of work.
Yeah.
Why is this incessant, energy-intensive process necessary?
3 big reasons. First, and maybe most importantly, is to repair microdamage. Daily activity creates tiny microcracks in the bone. Remodeling finds them and fixes them before they can accumulate and lead to a stress fracture.
Okay, so it's preventative maintenance.
Exactly. Second, it allows the bone to adapt its structure to changing mechanical loads. This is Wolff's Law again. If you take up a new sport, remodeling will strengthen the bones that are being stressed.
And third, it's about that mineral bank.
It's about maintaining systemic calcium homeostasis. It's the mechanism for making those deposits and withdrawals we talked about.
And this whole process is carried out by this little functional group of cells.
The basic multicellular unit, or BMU. It's a tightly coordinated team of osteoclasts and osteoblasts working together. A demolition crew followed immediately by a construction crew.
And it happens in a predictable cycle. It starts with activation.
Right. Something has to kick it off. Usually it's a signal from an osteocyte that has sensed some microdamage. This signal recruits the cells and tells the osteoclast precursors to get ready.
And once they're activated, the next phase is resorption.
The demolition begins. In cortical bone, the osteoclasts team up to form what's called a cutting cone. They literally tunnel their way through the existing bone, dissolving a cylinder of old, damaged tissue.
And on the surface of trabecular bone, they just dig a trench.
Yep. It's a highly aggressive process. They clear out a specific volume of old bone. This can take a few weeks.
After the cutting tone is passed, there's a short little phase called reversal.
It's the handoff. The osteoclasts finish their job and leave. Then a group of mononuclear cells comes in and cleans up the resorption cavity. They prepare the surface and lay down a special layer called a cement line.
Which is the signal that demolition is over and construction is about to begin.
It's the foundation for the new structure. And that brings us to the final phase.
Yeah.
Formation.
The osteoblasts arrive. The construction crew.
They line the walls of the newly carved tunnel or trench, and they start doing what they do best, secreting layers of new osteoid. They work from the outside in.
In cortical bone, they form the closing cone.
Right behind the cutting cone. They lay down new lamellae, gradually narrowing the tunnel until all that's left is a new central diversion canal around the blood vessel. A brand new osteon is complete.
And some of those osteoblasts get left behind to become the new resident osteocytes.
And the cycle is complete. This continuous process of resorption, followed precisely by formation, is what keeps our skeleton strong, adaptable, and healthy throughout our lives. It's biological self-maintenance on a massive scale.
Okay, we've covered the materials, the cells, the architecture. Let's transition now into the physics of this system. Let's talk biomechanics. This is what explains how all these tissues actually handle the forces we throw at them.
Right, and to do that, we have to start with some fundamental definitions. We need a common language. Let's start with force.
A force is just an action that deforms an object, a push or a pull.
And in the musculoskeletal system, we're mainly concerned with 5 types of force. You have tension, which is a pulling or stretching force.
Like a muscle pulling on a tendon.
Perfect example. Then you have compression, which is a squeezing or pushing force.
Like your body weight compressing the cartilage in your knee.
Exactly. Then there's shear, which is a sliding force where 2 parallel surfaces slide past each other. Very important in joints. And finally, you have torsion, which is twisting, and bending.
And bending is always a combination, right?
Always. Bending places one side of the structure in tension and the opposite side in compression.
Okay. And then for rotational forces, we talk about moment or torque.
Right. Torque is just the rotational effect of a force. You calculate it as the force multiplied by the lever arm, the perpendicular distance from the axis of rotation, longer lever arm, more torque for the same force.
So when these external forces are applied, the tissue resists internally. And we call that internal resistance stress.
Stress is force per unit area. And the resulting deformation, the change in shape, is called strain. Strain is the change in length relative to the original length.
And the relationship between stress and strain tells us everything about a material's properties. We visualize this with the force deformation curve. This is a really key concept.
It is. So imagine you're pulling on a tendon. As you apply more force, it stretches, it deforms. Initially, you're in what's called the elastic region.
What does that mean functionally?
It means that if you let go, the tendon will snap right back to its original length with no damage done. It's like a perfect spring.
And the steepness of that initial line, the slope, that's the material's stiffness.
Or its modulus, yes. A very stiff material like cortical bone has a very steep slope. A more flexible material has a shallower slope.
But if you keep pulling, you eventually reach a point of no return, the elastic limit.
The elastic limit or the yield point. Beyond this point, you've entered the plastic region. The deformation is now permanent. You've started to cause micro damage, tearing collagen fibers.
So even if you let go now, the tissue is permanently stretched out. It's injured.
It's injured. And if you continue to apply force, the stress will rise to a peak. That's the ultimate strength of the material. And then it will fail completely. It ruptures.
Okay, but biological tissues are more complex than a simple spring. They are viscoelastic.
This is a critical property. Viscoelasticity means that the tissue's response depends on the rate at which you load it.
So if you pull on it quickly, it responds differently than if you pull on it slowly.
Very differently. It behaves more stiffly when loaded quickly and more flexibly when loaded slowly. This time-dependent behavior is what makes it viscoelastic.
And this leads to 2 really interesting phenomena, creep and stress relaxation. Let's start with creep.
Creep is what happens when you apply a constant load to a tissue over a long period of time. The tissue will continue to slowly deform.
The classic example is our height over the course of a day.
It's the perfect example. You're taller in the morning because your intervertebral discs have rehydrated overnight. Then throughout the day, the constant compressive load of gravity slowly squeezes fluid out and the discs creep, making you slightly shorter by evening.
And stress relaxation is the flip side of that coin.
It's the inverse. If you stretch a tissue to a certain length and then hold it there, constant strain, the internal stress within the tissue will gradually decrease over time. The tissue relaxes into the new position. This is the principle behind static stretching.
Fascinating. And there's one more concept here, hysteresis, the energy loss.
Hysteresis is a hallmark of viscoelastic materials. When you load a tissue and then unload it, the unloading curve on the graph doesn't follow the same path as the loading curve. There's a gap between them.
And the area of that gap represents energy that was lost.
Lost from the system usually is heat. And this isn't a bad thing. It's a vital protective mechanism. It's how tissues absorb shock. A tendon absorbs some of the energy from an impact, dissipating it as heat, so that less of that damaging energy reaches the bone. It's a built-in damper.
So if we compare the different tissues using this biomechanical lens, the differences are stark. Cortical bone is super stiff, very strong in compression.
But it's brittle. It fails at a very low strain, only about 2 or 3% deformation.
Whereas a tendon or a ligament, which is designed for tension, can stretch much further.
10 to 15% strain before it ruptures. And then you have articular cartilage, which has relatively low strength, but it's the king of deformation. It can be compressed by 30, even 100%, making it the ultimate shock absorber.
It's just a perfect match of material properties to functional demand.
Every single time.
Okay, we've covered the materials. Let's look at how they're all connected. Let's talk about joints, and we can classify them based on what kind of tissue connects the bones.
Right. We can start with the simplest and least mobile, the fibrous joints, also known as synarthrosis, which means immovable or just very slightly movable.
And here, the bones are just joined directly by dense fibrous connective tissue.
That's it. You have 3 main subtypes. First, the sutures of the skull, where the bones are interlocked and held by a very thin layer of Sharpie's fibers. They're designed to fuse over time.
Then you have a really specialized one, the gomphosis.
The peg and socket joint that holds a tooth in the jaw. The ligament there is the periodontal ligament.
And finally, the syndesmosis.
This is where bones are joined by a larger sheet or ligament of fibrous tissue, like the interosseous membrane between the radius and ulna in your forearm, or the ligaments that hold the tibia and fibula together at the ankle.
Okay, so that's fibrous. Next up in mobility are the cartilaginous joints, the amphioarthroses.
Slightly movable. And here, the connecting tissue is, you guessed it, cartilage, either hyaline or fibrocartilage.
The first type is a synchondrosis, a primary cartilaginous joint.
These are joined by hyaline cartilage, and they're usually temporary. The best example is the epiphyseal growth plate. It's a joint, technically, that is destined to be replaced by bone in a process called synostosis.
The connection of the first rib to the sternum is another example.
Right. Then you have the second type, the symphysis, or secondary cartilaginous joint.
And these are the tough ones, connected by fibrocartilage.
This is where you need strength and a little bit of give. The pubic symphysis, and most importantly, the intervertebral discs. They are designed to withstand incredible combined forces of compression, tension, and shear.
And finally, we get to the main event, the synovial joints, the diarthroses, freely movable.
This is the most common and most functionally complex type of joint. And they're all defined by having a joint cavity. They have bone ends covered in articular cartilage. The whole thing is enclosed in a fibrous capsule, and it's lined by a special synovial membrane.
Right, which produces the synovial fluid that lubricates the joint. So let's dig into the mechanics of that synovial joint. Its success really depends on all those components working together. Let's start with that articular cartilage again.
We know it's incredibly smooth, almost frictionless. But how it achieves that is brilliant. It uses a mechanism called weeping lubrication.
Weeping lubrication.
When you put a load on the joint, say you stand on one leg, the pressure on the cartilage squeezes fluid out of that porous matrix right onto the surface.
So it creates a little film of fluid between the two cartilage surfaces?
A hydrodynamic film. The two surfaces aren't actually touching. They're gliding on this layer of pressurized fluid.
And when you take the load off, the fluid gets sucked back in, ready for the next step.
Exactly. This dynamic, pressure-driven lubrication system dramatically reduces friction and prevents wear and tear on the cartilage surface.
And the fluid itself comes from the synovial membrane.
Right. This membrane lines the entire joint capsule, except for the cartilage surfaces themselves. It's highly vascularized, and its job is to filter blood plasma to create synovial fluid.
And that fluid isn't just water. It has key ingredients.
2 main ones. Hyaluronin, which is a big gag that gives the fluid its viscosity, its thickness, and a protein called lubricin, which is thought to be more involved in boundary lubrication when the surfaces might actually touch under very high loads.
And because cartilage is avascular, this fluid is its only source of nutrition.
Its only source. The health of the cartilage is completely dependent on the quality and circulation of the synovial fluid.
Now, some of the more complex joints, like the knee or the jaw, have extra pieces inside, the intra-articular discs or menisci.
These are crescent-shaped pads of fibrocartilage, and they serve a few really important roles.
Okay.
They improve the congruence, the fit between two bone surfaces that don't match perfectly, like the round femur on the flat tibia. They act as major shock absorbers, and they help distribute the load over a wider area of the articular cartilage, protecting it from high peak stresses.
Now, synovial joints are classified by their shape, which dictates the kind of movement they allow. Let's run through them quickly.
The simplest are Plain joints, like between the small bones in your wrist, they just allow a little bit of gliding.
Then hinge joints, like your elbow or your finger joints.
One axis of motion, flexion and extension only.
Pivot joints allow rotation.
Right, like the joint between your first and second vertebrae that lets you shake your head no, or the joint in your forearm that lets you turn your palm up and down.
Ellipsoid joints are biaxial, moving in two planes.
Like your wrist joint. An oval-shaped condyle fits into an elliptical socket.
And then the unique one, the saddle joint.
Found at the base of your thumb. It's two reciprocally shaped surfaces, like two saddles fitted together. It also allows biaxial movement, but with a greater range.
And finally, the most mobile of all, the ball and socket joints.
The hip and the shoulder. Multiaxial, they have the greatest freedom of movement, but that often comes at the cost of stability.
And that's a key concept for joint stability, the difference between the close-packed and loose-packed positions.
This is a really important functional idea. Every synovial joint has one position where it is most stable. That's the close-packed position.
What defines that position?
Two things happen. The joint surfaces become maximally congruent. They fit together as tightly as possible. And the major ligaments in the joint capsule are pulled maximally taut.
So the joint is essentially locked and stabilized by both the bones and the soft tissues.
Exactly. The knee in full extension is the classic example. It's incredibly stable. There's very little wiggle room, or what we call accessory movement.
And the loose-packed position is the opposite of that.
It's every other position. But there's usually one position of maximum looseness. In this position, the joint surfaces have the least contact, the ligaments and capsule are slack, and accessory movement is at its maximum.
So it's the most mobile position.
But it's also the position where the joint is most vulnerable to injury, because that intrinsic soft tissue stability is gone. The knee in about 25 degrees of flexion is its loose-packed position.
It makes perfect sense. Stability and mobility are always in a trade-off. Okay, we have covered the entire passive framework. The bones, the cartilage, the joints. It's time to bring in the engine, the active component, muscle.
Finally, the part that makes it all move. Muscle cells are amazing. They are highly specialized biological machines for one purpose, converting chemical energy from ATP into mechanical force.
And they use that force for movement, for maintaining posture, and even for generating heat to keep us warm.
And we're going to focus on skeletal muscle here. And just like bone, its microstructure is all about hierarchical organization. Layers within layers.
So you start with the muscle cell itself, which we call a muscle fiber, and these fibers are bundled together into fascicles.
Right. And then all the fascicles are bundled together to form the whole muscle. And each level is wrapped in a layer of connective tissue.
These are the mysiums.
The mysiums.
Yeah.
The endomysium wraps each individual fiber. The paramysium wraps each fascicle. And the epimysium wraps the entire muscle.
And these connective tissue layers are not just packaging, they're critical for transmitting the force.
Absolutely. They are all continuous with each other, and they all merge together at the end of the muscle to become the tendon. So the force generated inside the fiber is transmitted through these sheaths to the bone.
Now, the muscle fiber itself is a remarkable cell. It's giant and multinucleated.
Huge, 10 to 100 micrometers in diameter, and can be many centimeters long. And inside, it's packed with these long cylindrical structures called myofibrils. Those are the actual contractile elements.
And if we zoom in on a myofibril, we see this repeating pattern. The functional heart of contraction, the sarcomere.
The sarcomere is the basic contractile unit of all striated muscle. It's the segment of the myofibril that runs from one Z-disc to the next Z-disc.
And the reason it looks striated or striped under a microscope is because of the precise overlapping arrangement of the filaments inside it.
The thick filaments, which are made of a protein called myosin, and the thin filaments, which are mostly made of a protein called actin.
And their arrangement creates these characteristic bands, the dark A band.
So that's where the thick myosin filaments are, the entire length of them.
The light I band.
That's where you only have thin actin filaments.
And within the A band, you have the H zone in the middle.
That's the part of the A band where there's only myosin, with no actin overlap. And running right down the middle of the H zone is the M line, which anchors the thick filaments.
It's an incredibly orderly arrangement. And the whole process of muscle contraction is explained by the sliding filament theory.
That's the one. And it all starts with a signal from a nerve. An action potential arrives at the neuromuscular junction and causes the release of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine.
The acetylcholine triggers a new action potential in the muscle fiber itself. And that electrical signal spreads across the surface of the cell.
And critically, it travels down these deep invaginations of the cell membrane called T-tubules. They carry the signal deep into the muscle fiber.
And the T-tubules are right next to the muscle's internal calcium warehouse.
The sarcoplasmic reticulum, or SR. When the action potential travels down the T-tubule, it's like flipping a switch that tells the SR to open its gates and release a flood of stored calcium ions into the cell.
And calcium is the key that unlocks contraction.
Calcium is the trigger. It binds to a regulatory protein on the thin filament called troponin.
And that causes another protein, tropomyosin, which normally blocks the binding sites on actin, to shift out of the way.
Tropomyosin rolls over, and suddenly the active sites on the actin filament are exposed.
And the myosin heads, which are energized and ready to go, can now bind to those sites.
They form what we call cross bridges, and as soon as they bind, they pivot. It's called the power stroke. The myosin head pulls the thin actin filament toward the center of the sarcomere, toward the M line.
And then ATP comes in, allows the myosin head to detach, re-energize, and grab on again further down the actin filament, pulling it again.
It's a cycle, cross-bridge cycling. As long as calcium and ATP are present, the myosin heads will keep walking along the actin filaments, pulling them inward.
And here's the crucial insight from the theory. The filaments themselves don't actually get shorter.
They don't change length at all. The muscle shortens because the thin filaments slide past the thick filaments, pulling the Z-discs closer and closer together. The whole sarcomere shortens.
That's a beautiful, elegant mechanism. Now, how does the nervous system control all this? It uses the motor unit.
The motor unit is the fundamental unit of control. It's a single motor neuron, and all of the individual muscle fibers that one neuron innervates.
And the size of the motor unit dictates the level of control.
It's all about precision versus power. Small motor units, where one neuron might only connect to 5 or 10 muscle fibers, are used for very fine, delicate control, like the muscles that move your eyes.
And large motor units.
One neuron might connect to 2,000 muscle fibers.
Yeah.
These are for gross, powerful movements where you don't need fine control, like in your quadriceps or your glutes.
Now, all muscle fibers are not created equal. They're categorized based on their functional properties. The classic distinction is slow twitch versus fast twitch.
Right, and this is based mainly on two things. How fast their myosin can break down ATP, which determines contraction speed, and their primary metabolic pathway for making that ATP.
So let's start with the endurance fibers. Type I, the slow oxidative fibers.
These are the marathon runners. They contract relatively slowly, but they are incredibly resistant to fatigue. They are packed with mitochondria and myoglobin, which stores oxygen, giving them a red appearance.
And they rely on aerobic metabolism.
Almost entirely.
Yeah.
They are built for sustained, low-intensity activity. Think about the postural muscles in your back that are working all day long. Those are packed with type I fibers.
Then at the other extreme, we have the sprinters.
Type X, the fast glycolytic fibers.
These are all about speed and power. They contract very rapidly and generate immense force, but they fatigue in seconds. They have very few mitochondria and rely on anaerobic glycolysis for their ATP.
So these are for short, intense, all-out bursts of effort, a maximal lift, a jump, a sprint.
Exactly. And then in the middle, you have a hybrid fiber type.
Type IIA, the fast oxidative glycolytic. These are the versatile ones. They're fast, but they have a decent number of mitochondria, so they have some aerobic capacity and are more fatigue-resistant than the type IX fibers. They're highly adaptable to training.
And the source material makes a really interesting point. The fiber type, its identity, is determined by the motor neuron that innervates it.
The neuron dictates the phenotype of the muscle fiber. A slow neuron will make a fiber into a type 1, and a fast neuron will make it a type 2.
Which means you can actually change your fiber type distribution to some extent. Fiber tech transformation?
You can. If you take up long-distance running, that chronic endurance activity sends a slow signal pattern to the muscles. Over time, that can cause some of your fast type IX fibers to transform and take on the characteristics of the more fatigue-resistant type IA fibers. The system adapts to the demand.
We should also quickly mention repair. How do muscles fix themselves after injury?
That's the job of the satellite cells. These are essentially adult muscle stem cells. They're unfused myoblasts that lie dormant just outside the muscle fiber. When there's an injury, they become activated, they divide, and they fuse together to form new muscle fibers or patch damaged ones. They're crucial for regeneration.
All right, let's look at the muscle as a whole organ. Its ability to generate force and speed isn't just about the fiber type, it's also about the internal architecture.
The fiber architecture, yes. This is the arrangement of the muscle fibers relative to the direction of pull, and it has a huge impact on function.
We have two main patterns. The first is fusiform.
Fusiform muscles, like the biceps brachii, have fibers that run parallel to the long axis of the muscle. They run straight from one tendon to the other.
And what's the functional advantage of that arrangement?
Speed and range of motion. Because the fibers are so long and aligned with the direction of pull, the total distance the muscle can shorten is maximized. And that translates directly to a high velocity of movement at the joint.
Okay, so fusiform equals speed. The other pattern is pinnate.
Right, and this can be unipennate, bipennate, or multipennate. In pennate muscles, like the rectus femoris in your thigh, the muscle fibers insert at an angle onto a central tendon, like the barbs of a feather.
So they're not pulling in a straight line anymore, they're pulling obliquely. What's the consequence of that?
They sacrifice speed and range of motion. Because they're at an angle, the distance they can shorten the overall muscle is less, but they get something huge in return.
And this is the core trade-off, force versus speed. Why does the pennate arrangement generate more force?
It allows you to pack many, many more muscle fibers into the same anatomical volume. It fundamentally increases what we call the physiological cross-sectional area, or PCSA.
And PCSA is what's directly proportional to a muscle's maximum force-generating capacity.
Exactly. Force is all about the number of contractile units, the sarcomeres, you have working in parallel. A highly pennate muscle with its massive PCSA is inherently much, much stronger than a fusiform muscle of the same size.
So it's a design choice. The body can build a muscle for speed, or it can build it for strength.
It's an engineering trade-off. And then, of course, you have power, which needs both.
Right. Power is force times velocity.
So to be powerful, a muscle needs to be able to generate a lot of force and contract quickly. It's a combination of having a large PCSA and having reasonably long fascicles.
And there's one more factor that affects how much force a muscle can produce at any given moment. Its length. The length-tension relationship.
This is a fundamental property of the sarcomere. A muscle can only generate its maximum tension at one specific length. Usually it's near its resting length.
Why is that?
It's all about the amount of overlap between the actin and myosin filaments. At that optimal intermediate length, you have the maximum number of possible cross bridges that can be formed.
And if the muscle is stretched too far?
The filaments are pulled apart, there's very little overlap, so very few cross bridges can form, and force drops dramatically.
And if it's compressed too short?
The actin filaments from opposite sides start to overlap and interfere with each other, and the thick filaments run into the Z-discs. Again, the number of effective cross bridges plummets, and force drops off. It's a protective mechanism that keeps the sarcomere operating in its safe and effective range.
Okay, that covers the engine. Let's finish up with the transmission system, the tendons and ligaments that connect everything together.
The dense, fibrous connective tissues. Both are built primarily from densely packed type I collagen, the tensile champion, but they have different jobs.
Tendons connect muscle to bone.
Their job is force transmission. They are biological ropes designed to channel the huge tensile forces from muscle contraction to the skeleton to produce movement. They're incredibly strong in tension and can resist strains of up to 10 or 15% before they fail.
And ligaments connect bone to bone.
Their job is stabilization and restriction. They act as check reins to prevent excessive or abnormal joint movements, and they often contain a bit more elastin than tendons do.
So they have a bit more stretch.
A bit more give. A classic example is the ligamentum flavum in the spine, which is very elastic. It can stretch up to 50% without permanent damage, which is crucial for allowing the spine to bend and then recoil.
Their microstructure is very similar, though. Organized bundles of parallel collagen fibers.
Right. Fascicles surrounded by sheaths like the endotenon and epitenon. And the cells that maintain this matrix are called tenocytes, which are a type of fibroblast.
Now, there's a specific structural detail here that the source calls out as a beautiful example of engineering. The attachment of the tendon to the bone, the enthesis.
The enthesis is a masterpiece
Because
it has to solve a huge mechanical problem.
the mismatch between the two materials.
A massive mismatch. You have the soft, flexible, viscoelastic tendon on one side and the hard, rigid, ceramic-like bone on the other. If you just glued them together, the stress concentration at that interface would be enormous. It would rip apart.
So nature doesn't do that. It creates a gradual transition, a four-zone transition.
It's brilliant. It starts with the pure tendon tissue. Then, as it gets closer to the bone, it gradually transforms into fibrocartilage,
So it's getting stiffer.
stiffer. Then that fibrocartilage starts to mineralize, becoming calcified fibrocartilage, even stiffer. And then finally, that calcified fibrocartilage integrates seamlessly into the cortical bone itself.
So it's a graded interface that smoothly transfers the stress from the soft tissue to the hard tissue.
It dissipates the load and eliminates that dangerous stress concentration. It's why that junction is so incredibly strong.
It's just remarkable. And that brings us full circle, really, to our final topic. Because everything we've talked about, the alignment of trabeculae, the pennation angle of a muscle, the stiffness of a tendon, it's all governed by one overarching principle.
Mechanobiology, the idea that tissues sense and respond to their mechanical environment.
It's all summarized by Wolff's Law.
Wolff's Law is the classic statement of it. The structure and properties of these tissues will adapt in response to the loads that are placed upon them. It's a constant conversation between force and biology.
So when a tissue experiences increased loading, say, you start a weightlifting program, what's the response?
You get adaptive remodeling. The cells are signaled to produce more matrix to organize it more effectively. The bone gets denser, the tendons get stiffer, the muscles get bigger, the whole system gets stronger to meet the new demand.
And the opposite is also true. If you decrease the load, like with immobilization in a cast or long-term bed rest,
The use it or lose it principle kicks in. The mechanical signals stop, the osteocytes go quiet, the rank-LPG ratio shifts, and you get tissue atrophy. Bone loss, muscle wasting, reduced stiffness. The body is incredibly efficient. It won't waste energy maintaining a structure that isn't being used.
which brings us finally to injury and the limits of repair, particularly in a tissue like articular cartilage.
We touched on this earlier. Because of its avascular nature, a low metabolic rate, its capacity for repair is almost non-existent.
So an injury that goes deep enough, or just the cumulative wear and tear from years of high stress, can lead to progressive degeneration.
It does. The tissue tries to repair itself, but it can't regenerate that beautiful, organized, hyaline cartilage. Instead, it often forms a mechanically inferior scar tissue, a type of fibrocartilage, which just can't handle the loads in the same way. And that is the path that leads directly to degenerative joint disease and osteoarthritis.
It's a system designed for adaptation and repair, but it absolutely has its limits.
It does.
So we've taken this incredibly deep dive into the architecture of the musculoskeletal system. And what we've really found is that every single part, from the nanoscale alignment of hydroxyapatite crystals to the macroscale architecture of a pennate muscle, it's a triumph of specialized engineering.
It really is. It's this incredible balance of rigid mineral structures with viscoelastic fiber composites, and it's all being constantly monitored and remodeled by this interconnected network of intelligent cells.
What really stands out to me, though, is how critical the mechanical environment is to the whole system. It doesn't just tolerate load, it absolutely requires load to survive and to thrive. And this deep reliance on mechanosensing is profound. It makes me think about the future. It raises this important question. When we consider long-term human presence in environments where gravity is removed or altered, like on a mission to Mars, we know tissue atrophy is a huge problem. So what is the ultimate non-reversible functional ceiling for that atrophy? And can we ever truly engineer a perfect countermeasure here on a spaceship that perfectly mimics the complex, multi-directional mechanical demands of living on Earth that drive this whole adaptive cycle?
That is one of the great unsolved challenges of long-duration spaceflight. Replicating that constant low-level gravity signal for those mechanosensors, for the osteocytes, is incredibly difficult. We understand the biology, but duplicating that specific stimulus is a massive engineering problem.
It really is. So for you, the learner, as you go about your day-to-day, we just encourage you to notice these principles at work. Feel the creep in your spine as the day goes on. Think about the shock absorption in your cartilage when you walk downstairs, the pennate force of your calves as you push off. The sophisticated engineering that allows you to move is at work in every single step you take. The deep dive into your source material is complete.